Arizona and some of the pressures that are coming with the drought or the shortage or whatever you want to call it. And I don't know, we don't know, we know water sources for different farmers come from different places in Arizona, and that shapes your situation. So, but we also know that, we just, in driving here, we can see that the area around here is also changing a lot, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like you're sitting on the edge of an airport and a lot of other development, so I think it'd be nice for us to understand both how water fits in, but also just, how your farm operation is evolving, given where you're situated too, right?
Yeah. Well, the airport's actually been there for.
Wow.
So, anyway, it's ongoing. But before I forget about it, let me kind of address the urbanization aspect. That's one of the things about the Phoenix Active Management Area, which is the term that is derived from our Groundwater Management Act in Arizona, passed in 1980. So the Phoenix AMA, basically the outlines of it are the watershed high marks all the way around the valley. So the breaks of the mountains, and then it does have a river that traverses it, two of them, the Salt River and then the Santa Cruz coming from the south. And so, the Gila. So they've figured out ways to account for that, but so basically that's the planning area for this whole area. And agriculture, all of the farms in this area from the 1980 period, in the 5-year period before the act was passed, then we had to submit documentation to show what crops we had grown where, and that they had been irrigated. And so when that was accomplished, well, then we were issued an irrigation grandfathered rights, IGFR, for each of those acres. And then based on the crop history, you were also issued a water duty. So the water duty was our allowed pumping or allowed water use on those acres.
Yeah.
And if we were solely pump water farm, well, then that would determine what to utilize. You get some extinguishment credits.
Okay.
They're not very extensive. They should have more value than they do, frankly.
Right.
But if inside this AMA, I think general urban use, we used to figure at something like 2.5 acre feet per acre, maybe a little less than that. So if you had 4 and 5 acre foot per acre IGFRs, then when those get extinguished and they're replaced by use that uses less than that, and because so many farms have been extinguished in this AMA, that's one of the things that this AMA shows, that the water use right now, today, is no greater than the peak. And I think that the peak was somewhere in the early 60s. It was either the late 50s or early 60s. And so for a period of time, water use actually declined because the water use per capita is declining.
Right.
And we still are not using any more water. As a matter of fact, the continued conversion may continue to help the AMA.
Agriculture and is using water at a lower rate per acre.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and a key factor in the Groundwater Management Act was actually, and we felt like it was the only thing that agriculture really got out of the thing, other than creating actually a historic irrigation grandfathered right, is that whatever that right was, if it was 5 or 6 acre feet per acre per year, then it had a conversion right to a type 1 non-irrigation right that could be used for municipal use.
Right.
And that was set at 3 acre feet. So we had a 3 acre foot per acre conversion right.
Right.
Well, to prove an assured water supply, you can't do it on groundwater.
Okay.
Because the state was trying to encourage people at that time to use CAP water, Central Arizona Project, Colorado River water, because was kind of expensive and agriculture was not using very much of it. And so they were trying to do an end run and figure out ways to keep those
They were worried
voracious
that
Californians.
the Californians would take it all.
Yeah, make sure the water rights were secure by use, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, the last quite a few years now, well, that's how that has operated. So people have to secure. Actually, what they do is they allow you to pump the water as long as there's water under the ground, but then you have to replenishment, or you have to buy replenishment credits.
Right, and then those are at the price of the CEP water.
No, they're way more than that.
Oh, wait, okay.
CEP water may be $120 an acre foot or something, but those right now, those replenishment credits, I think they cost $750, something like that,
Something like that.
$750 an acre foot.
Our rule, I guess, is that, I mean, if you look at something like Verado, which is a development far west of here in the mountains over there, it has a 100-year assured water supply, and they're pumping groundwater, and they're buying credits to replace the groundwater, but we have no idea where the water that's being replenished is actually being replenished. It's not being replenished in that area.
Right.
It's being replenished somewhere else, and it's like, yeah, you're looking at the AMA as a whole, but that doesn't really mean necessarily that it's all in the same actual basin or aquifer.
It's
so
not hydrologically
connected, yeah. So and it doesn't. There's no requirement for that. It has to be within the AMA, which is all of Phoenix, but it doesn't have to be hydrologically
Right,
connected.
and so your concern is that water may not have, in a later date, be transferred,
Yeah, I mean, those people could still run out of water and then be like, wait, but what did we pay all this money for the replenishment credits for? And it's like, well, you did. It was replenished somewhere else.
Right.
And it's like, what? That's really
Yeah.
kind of defeat the purpose here, but whatever. Right, I mean, as you look at it, it's just sand.
Right.
But the question is whether or not, because the groundwater is so shallow in this area and it does move through the ground, whether or not that actually is surface water.
Right, so surface water percolating, if you will, or, sure. Right.
Well, and just to the south of us here, and we'll take a little tour around and take a look at it. The Buck Irrigation Company Canal is just to the south of us, and it's just a dirt canal. And they have their diversion structure out of the Gila River. It's just a half mile to the east, so you have their head gate there, and it diverts water out of the Gila River. Well, at that point in the Gila River, the majority of the water that's there is actually released from the 91st Avenue wastewater treatment plant, city of Phoenix, and all the other SROG cities, they call them. There's a big list of them. And that's the plant then that there's a big pipeline, 8-foot pipeline that goes through the bottom of the farm there too. It goes out to the Palo Verde nuclear plant. So they take 60 to 80,000 acre feet, I understand, each year to Palo Verde to cool the power plant. And the remainder of that water gets put into the riverbed. When it's in the riverbed, then
Maybe?
it may be surface water.
I mean, it's an ongoing. It's basically mostly a hydrological and somewhat of a legal contention, because this is Free River
Property in that district, yes.
This property is not though.
Yeah, and this property is not. But, so this all has to be pumped. And my dad bought this place in 1946, and the water table was around 30 feet, and I think it's about 40 feet now, so. And I did a little calculation one time, that same well that's right out there was here when he bought the place, and we've operated it and lived on it and ever since. And so I figured out, let's see, I was 5 years old when I first saw this place in 1946, so that would have to be 75 years. And we've been pumping enough water for, the old place was originally 360 acres, and basically that's what that well still serves, times about 6 acre feet. So I don't know, what is that, a couple thousand acre feet a year times 75, would that be 150,000 acre feet? That's about how much water I think it's Canyon Lake and the Salt River Project holds. And I give that visual to myself and I think, holy mackerel, that's a lot of water.
Right.
Well, but if anyone has doubts about whether water recharges or not, I mean, you'd think that would create a giant hole underneath you, but no, I mean, fortunately, the water has gone down a little bit.
Right.
As a matter of fact, it was getting a little too high there for a long time. And further west, it does get too high. And Buckeye Water Conservation and Drainage District also has drain wells in place where they.
Actually drain wells, not just
Yes.
not just tiles on the ag land, but drain
Yeah.
wells.
I think there's only a couple of farms that actually have tiles, but
Right.
they just have drain wells that they run all the time to
Right.
keep some of those areas from being waterlogged. But then further downstream from them is the Arlington District and the Paloma Irrigation District. And believe me, none of that water gets past those two entities. So even the water that's pumped as drainage water is utilized.
Right.
And one of the things about the shallow water that's notable, and it's so many people that I talk to about this water, well, gosh, you know, that's drinking water, right? Well, no, it really isn't, unless you don't mind drinking water that's 3 to 3.5 times the salinity of the Central Arizona project. People think Colorado River water getting further downstream at around 800, maybe 900 parts per million. I think 800 is the generally. We went to that is it gives us a uniform leaching capability. If you're farming in furrows and rows, after one season you've concentrated so much salt in the top of the bed that nothing will grow. Impossible.
Yeah.
And you can't pre-irrigate and then plant into a moist soil.
Right.
The seed will never sprout.
Well,
It will swell up, it'll get soft, but it'll never grow. So we were always using whenever we would plant on a bed before we started other system, we'd always have to irrigate it up. So you have to have free water present to get a seed wet enough to let it germinate.
And then that flood irrigation on the flat field also means that the water probably percolates through. You're not concentrating the salinity, you're distributing it. Right. You can percolate it.
And an interesting thing is that as we went away from furrow irrigation to all border, and it was really about 25 years ago when we decided to try no-tilling. I mean, for years it was always, finish the crop, you shred the residue, you rip it, you disc it, you land or plow it, then you disc it some more, then you land plane it, and then you furrow it out. I mean, we did 10 or 11 passes over a field between crops. And,
Right.
On this wheat that we're harvesting right now, today, on Monday, the university's going to be out here with their guys. They must be students because university can't work on holiday. But we'll be planting our variety trials, our cotton variety trials, right into that stubble.
Into the stubble of the wheat.
Of the wheat.
Yeah.
And then we'll be irrigating it immediately.
And does that no-till also then help with the salinity issue you raised?
We really believe it does.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for one thing, it just the presence of the residue
Right.
retards the advance of the water through the field, and that can be a real problem. In our very first years of experimenting with that, people say, "Oh, flood irrigation is so wasteful. Why would you do that?" I said, "Well, it's wasteful if you don't do it right." And I said, "But." So what we wound up doing, instead of years, we kept widening our borders out, and as we had laser equipment, well then we could make them perfectly flat side to side and give it a very uniform infall.
Right.
And what we started doing is squeezing the borders back together a little bit wide to pile the water a little higher with our TDS. And so we're limited on what we can grow.
Right.
You know, we really can't grow, most vegetable crops are not gonna be produced. At one time, we grew some here early on. A few years, it became evident that no,
The soil's too,
Yeah.
it's too saline for that.
too salty for it. So how much we need to be applying.
Yeah.
And that's just a swag, because we were at a meeting in Gallo's offices. They have a grower meeting. We grow some for Gallo and some for Constellation Brands and some for Sazerac.
Okay.
And they're all wine grapes.
Yeah.
So they're, mechanically harvested, mechanically pruned, and
Wow.
all these things. But we watch the water thing very carefully, mainly because of they're implementing their sustainable management program over there. We've been right square in the middle of that, and we sold 3,200 acres of land out on the west side.
Of the valley.
And because I'm worried about it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not something that we wanted to be involved in. We thought that this next generation, that probably would be where they would go after this was all developed over, but nobody wants to go over there. And they are in the second year of zero allocation out there of surface water. And all of the overhead of the whole system, you still have to keep maintaining.
Right.
And so the district has all of their budget and everything, and so, I mean, your annual assessments, if it's $150, $200 an acre, then what happens if you're only gonna be able to farm a third of it with groundwater? That just makes that 1/3 that's being farmed have to carry the overhead for the whole rest of the deal. I just said, no, I'm done.
Yeah.
That's not a business plan. And, maybe they'll have some water coming down. But what is really irritating to me, though, is that, and most people don't even know this, but do you know that they had 5 million acre feet of water that came down the Sacramento River, went out through the bay into the ocean
Yeah.
last year?
Yeah.
That came out of the reservoirs into the ocean. And the main reason is for environmental benefits. And no question, it benefits the environment, probably. But the new shortfall in the Central Valley is 2 million acre feet. And so that's what triggered the Groundwater Management Act,
Right.
because everybody was pumping another 2 million acre feet to make up for it.
Right.
And that's what the difference is. If they had 2 million acre feet, and they did have prior to 2006 or so.
There was more water coming from the delta than there is now.
Yes.
Right.
In that reservoir, and that's the only one, and they had to because they have an agreement with what they call the Cross Valley Contractors.
Okay.
And those guys have the prior rights to all the water that's in that lake right now,
Wow.
prior to the Friant Kern
Right.
diversions. And those guys, they cut them back, but I think they're gonna still get a 75% because their old appropriative rights
Right.
are much earlier. And they've already made a call on the river, I guess, but it's not for the full deal. I don't even know how that works in law, but so they are getting water now, and even our 15% may go away.
Wow.
But when you look at our grapes, the grapes are probably one of the best crops you could have, and all the acreage is planted. Doing some. We even made a couple of applications for trying
Right
some
now.
things. Yeah.
With NRCS, we implemented, we have a pivot sprinkler out in Rainbow Valley,
Yep.
which is what he was talking about. That was 10 miles south of here. We have on the pivot sprinkler, actually, the newest thing is that we actually have a drip system that attaches to the sprinkler, that it just drags it around in a circle. And
Nobody's tried that yet
No one.
in a high ET area, so
Yeah.
$44,000 that cost is at our risk.
Right.
We try to get somebody to,
Study it.
how about take a look at this? Will it work in this area? So we were trying to figure out this morning. We can't run more than 1,000 GPM through that thing
Yeah.
because the whole system is not designed to have that much water go through it. But we're not sure we can meet the ET requirements. It's got corn under it right now, and
It's our only corn.
We haven't talked about pivot sprinklers to that many people thus far. We've mostly talked about just the improvements you can make to flood, you can make to drip, and you can make to sprinklers themselves. How big of a thing could pivot be?
Oh, and it's also huge. I mean, it's huge from a water saving standpoint. We think. I mean, we've tried to calculate how much water in inches we were putting through, because this is our just second year or third year.
well, no, I mean, last year was our first year.
Oh, yeah,
full
so it's
year.
just the second year, and so we were trying to calculate how much water we put on that corn, and compared to what we know, we grew a little bit down here last year too.
Yeah.
In the comparison, I mean, it wasn't even close. It was like what, a third?
Yeah, well, at least half of
Yeah.
what we used to.
And it's just wild. So, but it's not just that though. It's also labor.
That's our
another
big deal right now.
huge thing. Yeah, being able to just turn. I mean, you can. It's hooked up to a thing. You can just turn it on and off with your phone and look at where the pivot is, and adjust the speed. It's a high speed pivot. So that's.
So you're saying actually it's an advantage for labor saving too?
Oh yeah.
I wasn't sure which way that labor was going.
It seems like
Oh, yeah.
sprinklers, like the ones with the big pipes and stuff, that seems like the most labor intensive.
Like
In terms of
like will you go out and put out the
Yeah.
sprinkler pipe? Oh yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, we wouldn't do that. No, it's electric, like the towers and everything, and it's, what is it, 4 hours to,
Yeah, it takes 3.5
3.5
hours to make a
hours.
lap at full speed.
so it's 160 acres, right, block, but it's like 116 with the circle covers, right? So 3.5 hours, I mean, it's moving.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that
Wow.
made us want to try one here now, because the old ones, the engineering was never quite right.
Yeah.
Where, because some of these soils have a lower intake rate than what the
Yeah.
daily ET is.
Right. So you literally couldn't put enough water on.
You couldn't
It would just.
get enough water to
Especially with sprinklers. I mean, the ones we use are not a fine spray. We try to get basically the biggest droplet size that you could possibly get, because we wanted it to not evaporate instantly upon hitting 120-degree air and just be gone.
Right, you're just watering the atmosphere.
Yeah, 3% humidity.
Yeah, 3% humidity. So I mean, it just the atmosphere just
Might be
consumes
4 by
water.
the time you irrigate it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's been a little rough in terms of trying to get it figured out, because it's like the corn it's there. It's the
You're talking about drip on the pivot.
Yeah, and it just drags it in, but it's like not set up quite right. So it was like the drip tape was climbing the plant, and it was in the air, and it's like, it's not.
And how-
it's supposed to be?
How's the pivot system powered again?
It's electrical. So we have a pipeline that goes from a nearby well, that crosses a road and then goes down, and then so that's the pump, and then the same thing is
Yeah. The other one that
Like
we
with it.
made the application through NRCS.
Or like an alfalfa, or I'm just trying to get perspective.
for sure. There's just not a lot of.
There was one diesel. It was very common to have diesel engines over there, but the Air Quality Board started outlawing them. So we converted one over to electric. And most of the wells are not that deep in California. They're small wells, and the pumping levels on them are like 120 to no more than, I think the deepest drawdown would be to 200 feet, because a couple of the wells themselves are only 200 feet. So the water levels in general are fairly shallow. Out on the west side, it was a totally different question though. I mean, they were several hundred feet deep.
Well, tell them about ED8. Tell them about ED8.
Yeah. So,
Another acronym.
well, here in this area, we have been the board chairman since we organized it in 1985 of an agricultural electrical district. So we have our own electric utility, and we don't own any wires, and the only asset we have is money in the bank.
Yeah.
And we pay for using the wires and meter reading and everything. We pay all that, and then we buy generation from a couple of different sources, and we do get some power out of Hoover Dam. And so what's going on the Colorado River impacts us greatly right here on this farm, because when you have water falling through the dam at a lesser height, you get fewer kilowatt hours per acre foot.
Yeah.
And then when you, for the first time, I mean, this year, well, they had a little bit, I guess, last year that they didn't put through the dam, but this year will be the first time there's actually fewer acre feet falling through the dam, a significant amount.
Right.
And so
The tier
put
one,
those
right?
two together,
Yeah.
and then you have, it's a cost-based resource, so all of the costs are still the same. So like that electric, or that water district I was talking about a while ago, all those costs keep going on.
So
So
your
you have
rates
to
are super going up.
so the rate shoots up pretty dramatically. And then for the balance of our electricity, we buy it, it's a gas-fired resource.
Right.
And with natural gas prices shooting up.
Right, so it used to be your hydro was your lower cost.
Yep.
And your natural gas was your higher cost. Probably your hydro is still your lower cost, but it's going up and the natural gas is going up some more.
Oh,
Yeah.
And the difference, I mean, the natural gas stuff, I mean, the futures and the instability, I guess, of the market is just insane.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we were paying this time, last year, it was around $2.50 a million BTU, however they measure that. Now it's $7. So
Yeah.
and we have a long-term power purchase agreement that we have a fixed cost for 25 years on the generating facility.
Right.
So our real variable cost is the gas that's going through it.
Right.
Or people weren't involved, and I was just like, how are you not
Yeah.
seeing that this is coming, and what the impacts this is going to have to just, everybody's industry and livelihood. And
Yeah,
I know from my work in UW with a lot of ecologists and grassland people and other folk that these identifying the carbon sequestration, like you can do it for a year, but then what is it really for 3 years or 5 years or 7 years once
or
you,
we've been
right?
doing it for 20 on some of these.
Right, right.
It's like, well, yeah, you're starting. So anything we are looking at now, and they're taking samples and saying, oh yeah, this is what your carbon is. It's like, okay, well, if we were to actually get credit for it on like a fairness scale, though,
You should be
from what it was.
right. Well, this is the thing.
Go out and look at a
Yeah.
desert, a bare desert ground, and say, oh, there's almost zero carbon in the
Correct,
ground whatsoever.
correct. I mean, one thing I read an interesting paper that what they call like, should we be grandfathering people in, right? In the
Right.
sense, as opposed to what you're doing that's new,
Yeah.
right? Because you're saying we've been doing this for a while,
Yeah.
and
When
we
there was
and
no
we
benefit.
and right, and we've built this up, and now we can only get a little bit more. But what about? Oh, should we tear all this stuff out,
Yeah.
start over, throw all the carbon in the atmosphere, now pay us? I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So
Well, all that stuff in the Rainbow Valley had never been farmed that way, so we took over like 1,600 acres, and so
Putting it in the rotation again,
we've implemented our system on it, and then underneath that pivot, that's why we grew 3 crops on it. We had forage wheat, then we had corn, and then forage sorghum
Wow.
after that. So we had 3 harvested crops in
the last year.
in last year underneath that, and it's quite easy to deal with because to